Well, he's a big deal when he comes on the podcast, not once, but twice. And there's good reason for that. Dennis Deninger, he is a professor at Syracuse, TV executive. He has done so much, a great historian. I learned so much every time that he talks. And I feel like we're going to learn a lot from him today as he talks about his new book, How the Football Game That Changed America, how the NFL created a national holiday. Essentially, I feel like, Dennis, we're going to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl. And I'm Bryan Fenley. This is an opportunity to showcase Dennis and talk about the book. And thanks so much for joining me and having this conversation.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
One of the things that I'm curious about, because I know you've gone on a book tour, and I'm listening to some of the questions that are being asked, some great questions about your book, and we're going to go there as well. But how do you decide in an interview what you're going to reveal and what you're not to get people to read it, as if not to get
It's
everything
very
away?
interesting. Yeah, that's critical, actually, because if I explain too much in too much detail, then it's going to say, well, why should I go read the book? But, I mean, I'm here to talk about the Super Bowl, and I can't just say, well, it started in 1967, and you got to figure out the rest of it. So there's certain things that, okay, this is a milestone, and then you go in deeper in the book as to why it's a milestone and who were the colorful characters involved and what kind of quirky twists happened that make it that much more interesting. And believe me, there's a lot of these characters and twists and bold rivals at work, and a lot of the forces. And one of the reasons for writing this book is that when I went out and looked for Super Bowl books, I teach this course about the impact that the Super Bowls had on America. There really wasn't anything that went into detail about how this one annual event has changed our lives. It has become America's secular holiday, if you will, and that's unlike any other sport. The World Series is played at home and home. You don't know where it's going to be until about a week before. The same with the NBA finals. You know where the Kentucky Derby is going to be, but not that many people follow horse racing these days. So, and very few things in America have a 40+ billion-dollar impact. I mean, that number is higher than the gross domestic product of a lot of countries for an entire year. So it's got a huge impact on the way we get together, on the way we socialize, and on the media and on advertising and entertainment. So that's why I started 5 years ago on this project, and very happy to see it in full form.
Well, one of the things I see behind you in full form is an Emmy, and we want to make sure that we mention that you are an Emmy Award winner. And as we dive further into this book, where do you start with a book like this? What is the first line? What is the first paragraph that you put down as you're starting to game plan about how you want this sequence of words to be on a book like this of this magnitude?
I think that the best thing to do is put it into a perspective, and that right now it's this huge colossus. But when the NFL started back in 1920, it was a group of guys meeting in an automobile showroom in Canton, Ohio, and there weren't enough chairs. So George Halas remembered sitting against a bumper of one of these cars, and they had a bucket full of ice with some beers in it. And that's how they came about creating the NFL. So it was very humble beginnings and not as organized as the way we see the NFL now. And you fast forward to the Super Bowl, and how did that come about? Well, it was because basically the NFL of the 1950s wasn't adapting to change. And here along comes Lamar Hunt with lots of money and says, I'd like to start a franchise in Dallas. And they said no. The NFL owners, no, our teams have cut up the country, and we've got viewers down there, and that's going to hurt us. So he wound up starting a new league with a lot of these rich guys who did want teams in cities that did not have NFL teams, in Denver and San Diego, and a second team in New York, and the teams that started the AFL. So he launched a new league, and because there was a rival league, then you had one league versus another, and basically the economic realities of one league fighting another league for players. And Joe Namath signing in 1965 for over $400 million really tipped the scales. Is the NFL owner said, we can't continue to pay money for these players. We're going to have to merge with these other guys and figure out a championship between us. So, a lot of American business reality, some accidents, some changes of direction. If the NFL had said yes, which is a pretty good idea to put a team in Dallas when you think in retrospect. And he said no. If they had accepted Lamar Hunt back then, we would not have had a Super Bowl. It would have continued as the NFL championship, and one team would have played host, and another team of the other division, whatever would be, would be its rival.
Where, with all of this information that you're giving, which is fascinating, in the lead up to the Super Bowl and how it's become what it is today, when I think of putting together a book like this, I'm thinking a lot of time in the library. I got to do a lot of research. And I'm thinking to myself, how many books are there in the library that, I mean, because a lot of what you're explaining, the relationships that you have forged, and you've been on the ground for a lot of what's going on as far as the NFL and its transformation and evolution. But when I'm thinking of research for a book like this, I know a lot of the information is already within you, but where do you go when there's something you're trying to connect the dots here, and you're looking at something that you want to include in the book? To what extent do you go about finding that information?
The first Super Bowl that I covered for ESPN was for ESPN Digital, and that was Super Bowl 40 in Detroit 19 years ago. And that kind of opened my eyes to a lot of what was going on and who it was that I could talk to and ask questions of. And I was very fortunate. I was hired at ESPN by a terrific, an innovator in television by the name of Bill Fitz, Fitts. And Bill was the CBS Sports executive producer for Super Bowl one, two, four, six, and eight. So Bill had a lot of Super Bowl experience. And when I launched this class at Syracuse University about the Super Bowl and its impact on society, one of the first things I did an interview with Bill Fitz. And I asked him about what went on. And oh my goodness, in the book, there are some of the just craziest things that he had to deal with. One of the problems, and that they didn't get congressional approval to extend their antitrust. I'm getting a little bit deep here. But
Yeah.
anyway, the NFL did not have a full go-ahead to do a Super Bowl until November 1st of 1966, and it was scheduled for January 15th of 1967. So you can imagine all of the things that had to happen between, in those 6 to 8 weeks there. So Bill has some great stories, and that led me to talk to a number of people who had covered far more Super Bowls than I. I talked to Jerry Eisenberg, who covered the first 52 in a row. So I did a number of original interviews, and did some digging into, archives. And then the more things that you find out, the more things you become curious about. Everything that we find should always raise another question. Okay, how do I find this out? So then you start digging into like the archives of Nielsen ratings, and what were the ratings for Super Bowl one, and how did they change when certain milestones happened. And then, I mean, I've got very good friends with Fred Godelli, who he's produced 7 Super Bowls for ABC and then for NBC, and Drew Esikoff. I mean, we all started at ESPN together, and Drew was the director. So I've been in their trucks, and I've interviewed them and talked with them. And I've got a dear friend who is one of the senior producers at NFL Films, and he covered so many Super Bowls. So but most of it was original research, because in the library, most of the books are the great rivals of the Super
Yes.
Bowl, or the great Super Bowl games, or the great Super Bowl dynasties. There wasn't really anything that connected the Super Bowl with society and culture and entertainment and the way we live, the way that it has had that influence. So that's what I said about this project.
By the way, Fred Godelli came on the podcast, a fantastic human being. And I'm so grateful to have him on. And obviously, with his ties to the NFL, I can't imagine how many stories that you two have been able to swap back and forth about the Super Bowl and everything that is around it. And I love it about when I learn about sort of the way in which you are looking into the information that is needed for a book like this, that you're genuinely curious. You're always looking for the question that needs to be answered. And not to put you on the spot, Dennis, but what is the question about the Super Bowl that you're still looking for, that you're still trying to figure out if there is one?
Well, you know what? The last chapter of the book, and this is a good tease for the reading the book,
Yeah.
is I project forward based upon the research I've done. I project what Super Bowl 100, Super Bowl C in the year 2066 might look like, based upon advances in technology, advances in transportation, and changes in culture, changes in our society. So it's kind of that's what I'd love to find out. And as things move forward, and as more technology comes on board, it changes the way that we consume any kind of media. And that Super Bowl is what, 41 years away. 41 years ago, if you take a look at how technology has changed, they had just introduced the telestrator. I mean, John Madden got his hands on the telestrator just 41 years ago, and all of the changes in the transmission. And there was no streaming, there was no internet. And now the Super Bowl is distributed in many, many different ways. It's distributed internationally because you can. There weren't geosynchronous orbiting satellites back 41 years ago. So who knows what might be the world that we live in 41 years from now. So technology, and whenever technology changes, creative people then figure out, oh, what can I do with this tool? It's like being presented a new tool on your workbench. And oh, how can I use this? And okay, how can I improve? And that's the type of thing that Fred Godelli and Drew Esikoff, these guys that have produced and directed Super Bowls all along, is every time that there's new technology, they apply their wisdom and their curiosity to how can we make this, apply this to our shows and make better shows. So that's the interesting part of doing this, because everything that happens always raises more questions.
Well, with that said, Dennis, where do you find that with the advent of technology and how everything is constantly changing, that there, when getting an idea of what the consumer is looking at as far as Super Bowl and obviously, tapping into your brain, where you are able to, there's some things about the consumption where you feel like there is the weaving in of some traditionalism of how you watch the sport, and where the fan, with all of the newness that's coming, with all of the bells and whistles that are with each coming year are changing the way we watch football and the Super Bowl, that there's some bottom line things that just won't change for the better. Where do you see that coming from, and what are those things?
When you think about how we have become a society of people who see the Super Bowl as a reason to get together, and that's what's not going to change. And the reason I say the tagline of the book is how the NFL created a national holiday is, and it's not an official national holiday, but when you think about, all right, a holiday is people get together for a common purpose. We all get together at Thanksgiving, right? You celebrate the harvest, you celebrate your family. A lot of people get together around the Christmas holidays, and whether or not, whatever religion you are, there's lots of people getting together and exchanging gifts, exchanging greetings and love. Well, when you get to at the Super Bowl, there's a lot of people getting together for this one purpose. And it doesn't really matter which teams are playing. You're going to have parties, you're going to get together in people's homes. A number of people will buy new televisions to show off to their friends. Oh boy, I've got this great new set. And actually, there's a funny bit. There's this story in the book about how many of those televisions get returned because they just use them as, okay, this is impressing my friends, and now the friends are gone. Well, let's go back to the store. But anyway, those are the things that won't change. How people have adapted to the Super Bowl in their lives. And I also think that the Super Bowl has become, since the Super Bowl has become the most important advertising day of the year, it will continue to be one of these in the wintertime when advertisers and corporations want to launch a new product, they want to launch a new campaign, they want to attract attention to a new movie that's going to be coming out in the next few months, whether it's on a streaming service or whether it's at the theaters. And that type of thing has become ingrained in what we expect from the Super Bowl. So regardless of what technology, how we get it delivered, et cetera, and whether it's 3D or however we get it delivered to us, those are the things that people come to expect of the Super Bowl, and great entertainment. The entertainment portion of the Super Bowl, the halftime, is the most watched segment of the show, making it the most watched entertainment program of the year by far. 5 times as many people watch the halftime of the Super Bowl than watch the Academy Awards. So that is the type of thing that has become ingrained in what our expectations are for the Super Bowl to deliver to us as a social group.
So there's a lot of pressure on the decision makers to be up with the times, because you're touching on the love of football, but then you've talked a lot about how you want to get the right musical group or groups that are going to elicit the most attention in the halftime. What does it take to be the eyes and the ears on the ground, let's say, when you're trying to figure out who would be the perfect, considering all that you said about the 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 expansive television audience that comes with a halftime show? What do you think goes into the thought of those who are in charge of who we're going to go with, because of how important it is for the numbers and how many people are consuming the halftime portion?
Nothing changes quite as dramatically as the public taste for popular entertainment. If you sit and watch shows from 20, 30 years ago, you say, oh my goodness, this is edited all differently. They just, it's not the same entertainment. And you have to stay up with the times. And in its early years, the 1980s and early 90s, the NFL was kind of stuck in this. This is what the expectation is of entertainment. And their views were stuck maybe 20 years earlier. So you had a lot of these kind of grand entertainment spectaculars that they thought that, okay, the football field is this canvas, and we have to fill the canvas with all of these dancers and singers. And they NFL actually did 4 halftimes with a group called Up With People. And Up With People was this group of about 250 college age students from all around the world. And they basically did this kind of silly dancing and singing. And this is an era when the rest of the country is watching Bruce Springsteen and Madonna and Michael Jackson. And they're presenting at halftime this kind of very middle of the road kind of your dad's entertainment show. So that actually came to bite them. And in the 1990s, there's a great story in the book about how the Fox network, which was brand new, saw this as an opening.
Mm.
And they took advantage of the NFL. And it's great how they did it. But what happened that year was the NFL actually lost 25 million viewers tuned away from the game as soon as halftime hit. And Fox had a much fresher, newer, very different, hip entertainment that they put on instead. That forced the NFL to wait a minute. We're a lot out of the times here. We need to move forward. And the following year, Michael Jackson was the halftime entertainment. And the ratings, the TV viewership went up by 11 million people from one year to the next because it had become a rock concert. And they haven't gone back since. 1993 was that, and it was at Pasadena, the Rose Bowl. It was this fabulous entertainment spectacular of popular entertainment. So the threat is that if you ever get stuck in, okay, now maybe it's old guy rock and roll. Maybe they stuck, all the rock and rollers are 70 and 80 years old. That's not what people are watching now. So there are a lot of people at the NFL in their entertainment division who are really truly into where is new entertainment coming from? What are people watching? What are people buying as music? So that's where it was. There's one guy who I'd like to point out as one of the unsung heroes of the Super Bowl, and he's still alive. His gentleman's named Jim Steig, and Jim Steig was the young entertainment guy for the NFL. He's in his 20s back in 1982. And he said to the commissioner at the time, Pete Rozelle, I'd like to get Diana Ross to sing the national anthem. And Pete Rozelle thought, we're never going to get Diana Ross. Well, Jim Steve got Diana Ross, and she was the first of these major popular entertainment stars that the NFL used in their presentation. But it wasn't until 10 years later that halftime caught up.
So that's a really pointed story, because at the end of the day, the NFL, the last thing they want to do is alienate viewers. They want to keep bringing people in, and they've done such a good job at that. And you look at where they are now, at this powerful juggernaut, where it's obviously the most powerful sports league in the United States. You could argue even beyond that, obviously, with what they do and the amount of people who consume their product. How have they been able to be so flexible with what it's taking to get, like, how have they done such a good job right now, Dennis, of not alienating anybody, even beyond just what they choose for, say, who's singing the national anthem at the Super Bowl or at halftime, but where if you look at sports leagues, professional sports leagues in the United States, the NFL has done a great job of just opening arms to anybody who wants to come in. What have been the tactics for them to do that, that other sports leagues in the United States could probably learn from?
Well, you know what? In the second half of the previous decade, there was a lot of social unrest and calls for social justice, and the NFL quickly said, this is something that we should stand for. And we know that this is something that our players stand for. And you don't want to alienate your players, right? This is your product. And also this is representing where most of people think, okay, should we be for justice or should we be against justice? Those kinds of things, right? So you saw a lot of these messaging, and one of the key, I think, turning points in the NFL was the Super Bowl that was played in January 2018, and that followed the 2017 season, in which President Trump was pretty strong about throw these bums off the field, and the whole uproar that arose after Colin Kaepernick kneeled during the national anthem. So in that year, the Super Bowl actually lost viewership. So, okay, here's a national figure saying, these guys really, maybe they've gone off the deep end in this, they shouldn't be taking the stands that they do. And there was a drop in viewership of about 6 or 7 million viewers. And you don't want to see that if you're the NFL. But they did not abandon their stand. They did. This is what we stand for. And as the populace, I believe, adjusted to where are people coming from, and I think a lot of people felt that the president at the time was being too harsh in his criticism of players who mean so much to their communities, and they have community foundations where they're constantly helping people in there all across the country, and to just categorize them as bums was, unfair. So within a year after, the Super Bowl ratings rebounded back to where they were, and they've continued to grow. But I think you need to be really closely in tune with where the country's views are, how people, us, it's the society. It's not necessarily an elected leader here, there, or whatever. It's what does society feel is important, and what do we want to view? What do we want to watch for entertainment? And the Super Bowl and the NFL they're 95 out of the top 100 rated shows of the year, broadcast shows, are NFL games. So obviously it is entertainment that people want to watch. And you just have to be careful about that. I think right now, one of the major things the NFL has to be very careful about is that because sports gambling is now so easy to get involved with. And all you need to do, if you're a player or a fan, you just get on your phone and suddenly you're making a bet. If anything were to happen that called into question the integrity of any NFL game because of gambling. Some player, a la Pete Rose, some manager or player places a bet or two on a game that they're playing in, that could really cause. So that's why the NFL is so vigilant about enforcement. But on the other hand, economic realities have forced them to embrace legalized gambling. They've got, gambling partners and sports book partners. And when I was in Las Vegas for the most recent Super Bowl, and Radio Row, I'm looking at, there's a slot machine with the NFL theme and NFL highlights running, and like, oh my goodness, this is so different from the stand just of a few years ago before sports gambling became legalized, and the Supreme Court ruling that the Professional Amateur Sports Gambling Protection Act was unconstitutional, and that just opened the floodgates.
Well, you and I, Dennis, we've worked a lot in tennis, and unfortunately, when you talk about gambling and how that affects tennis and match fixing and stuff like that, that has been something that obviously the sport has really been vigilant about in trying to eradicate. With the NFL, and you talked about how vigilant they are and making sure there is that integrity. To what extent do they go about making sure they're vigilant? Like, what does that look like when they're out there on the front lines making sure that they preserve the essence of the sport as it needs to be?
Well, you know what? There are lots of different ways of tracking each of our internet practices and who we connect with and what we're sending out, et cetera. So, I'm sure that there's NFL security procedures in place and protocols that you and I don't know about, But the great distinctions between the NFL and tennis is that the NFL is frontline. It is in 32 major markets in the United States. It has um, the broadcast partnerships with all of the major broadcasters and with primary streaming services, whereby tennis is lots of different levels. There's the ATP and there's the Grand Slams, but then there's a challenger level and if you get down the levels, there's still people playing tennis that these matches are gambled on. So it's not exactly in the public eye. And there's so much of the product out there at so many different levels that the ATP and the WTA certainly want to keep a close eye on what happens in their events. But if you've got a challenger match being played right here in Cheshire, Connecticut, and there's no way the ATP or the WTA is going to be able to monitor the gambling that goes on some of these minor matches. And then what happens is when they find out there's been gambling on a local small match that tipped the scales and somebody made off with a whole bunch of money, and then they went into the Mid East and spent it on arms or who knows what, that's what gets bad publicity for tennis. It's certainly not at what would be the NFL level of that sport. And a lot of sports, soccer has the same problems. They've got huge international known teams that are constantly under the media scrutiny. But then they've got a lot of other sport that goes on, and there's nothing to prevent people from betting on these other sports. And if it's more local and it's out of the public eye, it's certainly easier to twist some arms or to, hey, kid, you're only making $100 by playing in this game. I can give you $500 if you just, you miss a goal, you let one pass, kind of thing.
Yeah, and you make so many great points, Dennis. And as we sort of wrap up this conversation, and I wanted to add one more question about your book, and then play off of what you just said about tennis. One of the things that I have a hard time with is that even at the challenger level, because there's gambling at the ITF level, that the gamblers, they will go on these players' social media accounts. And I think we saw this even at the US Open here, where just some horrible things are being said about these athletes, where the gambling is so influential that if somebody is losing, that they're just taking it out on the athlete. They have nothing to do with this. And it's just not fair that they're having to face this criticism that is extreme and is
Some
actually,
people have been sent to jail for
yeah.
making threats,
Mhm.
against NFL players. because of, all right, you missed that field goal
Yeah.
and you cost me my house. Well,
Yeah.
why are you betting your house on a game, right? But then there's this danger of people threatening, players threatening to their families. That's where it certainly goes way off the deep end. But people get so swept up in, I think I can win. I can think I can win. In Las Vegas, when we were out there for the Super Bowl, we had 6 of our Newhouse School students who were Falk College sport management minors.
Mhm.
And we also had 2 Falk College sport analytics majors, and they were doing a project on the influence of Las Vegas and the gambling on the Super Bowl and vice versa. So I went with them and we met with a number of representatives of sports books. And universally across the board, they say, Americans who bet on sports are terrible at it. Most of them don't know what compared to they've been these same gambling sports books have had setups in Europe for many years,
Mhm.
and they find that the gamblers there know a little bit better what they're doing, and the people who don't really know what they're doing but they think they do, I consider myself an expert. They're the ones who are easiest. They're the easiest prey to. Okay, you lost this bet, but we can make it easier for you. Hey, half off on your next bet, and so they
Yes.
they lure them into doing more gambling. So it's realizing what your limits are, and whether you're not you want to spend the time that it takes to get good at anything like gambling, and anything that we do. The players who play NFL football, they're the ones who focused on it's going to take this much time to get good at the high school level. It's going to get this much of a commitment to be really good at the college level. And then it's going to take so much work to stay on an NFL team and not get bumped by the rookie that they just drafted. So it's putting the time in that it takes to get good that a lot of people don't want to do if they're just gambling.
Well, and I feel like the gamblers that fall prey to what you're talking about, so much of it is just acting a quick whim emotionally. Like you're just oh, I just want to do this right now. And to your point, how much thought has gone into that? Where's the analytics? No, and that's actually kind of a parallel for a lot of things in life. When you're just instantly acting emotionally, that usually doesn't always lead to the best results. And in gambling, that works as well. But as we kind of wrap up this conversation, Dennis, I think one of the questions that I wanted to leave with here is that as your book in obviously Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, what are the places first of all that people can get a hold of your book, the best outlets for that?
Well, it's published by Rowman and Littlefield, which is Rowman and Littlefield. And you can go to Rowman and Littlefield online and you can get a little bit of a better price because you're not paying the middleman. It's also on Amazon, and Amazon, still a reasonable price. It's not a textbook, it's a trade book. So you can go to Amazon Books and just search my name, which is spelled Deninger. Everybody wants to put more N's, and believe me, with a name like Dennis Deninger, you got way too many N's anyway. So yes, Deninger. Just search that, and you'll find it's it's the football game that changed America. How the NFL created a national holiday, and it truly has. I mean, when you take a look at the recent coverage of the political conventions, there were less than half of the number of reporters covering the political conventions that covered the Super Bowl.
Wow.
There's 6,000 credentialed media. So the media coverage that it gets is beyond anything else in this country. The advertising impact, it's the most important advertising day of the year. It's the second largest food consumption day of the year. And I'll leave that question hanging. So when you read the book, you'll find out what the largest food consumption day is of the year. And it's really worked its way into what we do as a people. And, part of that, I said that $40 billion impact, about 5 billion of that is the lost productivity the day after the Super Bowl, with people they're either coming into work late or not coming into work at all. And now with the NFL going eventually pretty soon going to an 18 game, 19-week season, that pushes the Super Bowl back one more week. Will it always fall on President's Day weekend? So the Monday after the Super Bowl, folks, will become for a lot of folks, they get the day off. Now, you and I, we don't get the day off after for President's Day, but a lot of people do. So that is any attempt to make Super Bowl Sunday a holiday pretty much goes by the boards at that point because they've got President's, Super Bowl Day followed by President's Day, and you've got a nice holiday weekend. Enjoy.
I love how judicious you are about what you say and what you don't, and you let the consumer want to have to read on their own. We started this conversation talking about that. How do you draw that line? Because, yeah, you don't want to give it all away. You want to lure people in. I think you did a fabulous job doing that. Last question for you here, Dennis. And when you get people to read this book, and you're the interest is spiking right now, what is the most gratifying feedback that you would like to hear from somebody who has read the book?
Like to hear. And Chris Fowler put this in. Chris Fowler wrote the foreword, and he said, "You read this book, you'll never watch the Super Bowl the same way again, because you'll be aware of so many of these things that happened either in history that happened behind the scenes. What you'll be more of a I don't want to say critical viewer, but more of an informed viewer." And you can really be a pain in the butt to all of your friends who are watching the Super Bowl with you.
Yes.
Did you know that? So that's what I would love to hear from people, is that it changed the way that they watch the Super Bowl. And it's not going to stop. It's certainly, hopefully, it'll get more people to watch the Super Bowl, or at least watch it in a different way. You'll see it in a different light, and I hopefully shed light on some of the corners that you may not have been aware of.
Well, there's a lot that we are looking forward to getting aware of the book. The football game that changed America, how the NFL created a national holiday, Dennis Deninger. And Dennis, this has been such a fun conversation. I love the where the places where we went. It was fun filled, educational. And I think it is really cool when you go to a Super Bowl party, and I think people will gravitate towards the person who knows more about the big day from you reading your book. People like learning. And so, like, if you're looking to win a popularity contest at, say, a Super Bowl party, read Dennis's book, because everybody's going to come flocking to you because you've got information that others don't. And that's where the book comes in so handy. Dennis, I'm Bryan Fenley. Thanks so much, man, for coming on and doing this with me.
Pleasure. And we're continuing the course. We're going into our 15th year of teaching this course at Syracuse University's Falk College. And I've taught it so many times now that I've gone to Roman numerals. So this class will be Super Bowl and Society XV for 15.
I hope, and I just married a gal from Syracuse who went to Syracuse. So I hope that as we have our anniversaries, that we continue the Roman numerals past XV and beyond. Dennis, thanks again.
Pleasure, Bryan. Always great fun to see you.